Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming on. I see my partners here. Kris, we're ready to get going. Can you hear a loud hammering?
A little bit.
Oh my God. It's just perfect timing, right? Like our toilet's getting replaced. So there's that. But we'll go ahead and get started because it's 12 o'clock. So thanks for all of you for tuning in, whether you're attending now live or whether you're watching this on the replay. I personally am so excited about this. Like, I've been talking about this nonstop. Kris and I have been texting and chatting and sharing notes together. And I'm just like overly excited to be here. I'm putting it out now so I can kind of like rein it back in and not scare people off. But we'll just start with introducing ourselves. My name's Shaelene. I'm the owner of DBT of South Jersey. And this is my girl, Kris. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kris. I am the clinical lead and therapist at DBT of South Jersey.
Yeah, so at DBT of South Jersey, we're DBT fanatics. And if you haven't heard of DBT before, it stands for dialectical behavior therapy, not diabolical behavior therapy, which somebody asked me if that's what it stood for once. Maybe sometimes it feels like that, but dialectical behavior therapy, there's a ton that we can speak to and say about DBT, but what we're going to focus on here is just kind of tying in DBT to the bigger picture and why everyone's here and invited to the skill session today. So one of the big components, not the only component of DBT, is skills training. And skills training is basically sets of skills that are compiled in 4 different modules to help people regulate and have a life that they really want to live and participate in. It's not the only component of DBT, but it is a big component. And I think it's something that people really think of when they consider or talk about DBT or learn it for the first time. And so the reason that we're holding these skill sessions is really to create more accessibility to people to know about DBT and to learn about DBT. Maybe you're in an area where, it's kind of remote and you don't have a DBT therapist around you. Or maybe, you're a current client of DBT somewhere in the world who wants to learn more about skills. Or maybe you took DBT a while ago and you want a refresher. The bottom line here is that everyone can benefit from skills. And I know myself, I don't know, Kris, your stance on this, but I personally think that if everyone learned DBT skills, the world would be a bigger, better place in a lot of ways.
For sure. I feel like everyone needs some mindfulness.
Yeah, so many things that we want to share with you guys. And so this is the reason that we're holding these skill sessions. So we hope to hold them about every month. You should check them out on our website. We'll talk about the next one coming up as we wrap up. But that's why we're here. And then specifically today, we're honing in on one skill, and we're wrapping it up with this I would say like it's a craze. This book was written in 2018, but since then there's been like 3 million copies sold. And I'm not getting paid or anything by James Clear. I mean, it would be cool if he heard about this and like gave us a high five or something, but like, I just love the book so much. I read it. I talked to Kris about it. She read it. And we just thought like it really made sense to tie this into the skill of building mastery. And I think one of the reasons for that as well is like, with, at least for us being DBT therapists, we think of DBT a lot of the time in our lives, like we live it and breathe it. And so whenever I find something that relates to the skills, I try and bring it back in a way that other people can have access to it too. And hopefully that'll be something that's useful for all of you in your everyday lives. So with all that being said, I'm going to let Kris talk a little bit about the idea of building mastery, where it fits in the set of skills, and yeah, we'll go on from there.
All right. So building mastery is a huge skill. It's probably one of my favorites. I remember when I was reading this, I kept texting Shaelene, like, this is mastery. This is mastery. And she was like, yeah, Kris, this is mastery. But building mastery essentially falls under our emotion regulation skills. So in DBT, if you're not familiar with it, we have 4 different categories of skills, which are distress tolerance, emotion regulation, core mindfulness, and interpersonal effectiveness. Emotion regulation is so important because it really helps in a lot of different ways. It helps us reduce our vulnerabilities to extreme emotions. It helps keep us more regulated. It helps keep us more resilient. And it really tries, like the goal of this is to keep you what we would call your window of tolerance, where you can feel emotions and still stay effective. We don't feel out of control of our behaviors. And so this is a really important skill set for a lot of our clients to learn, and building mastery falls in here. So what we want to do is increase our ability to build mastery. And mastery is to do something that creates a sense of accomplishment. And it really helps you work towards a goal. And one thing we want to make sure we do in building mastery is making sure that we pick a task that is difficult but possible. So we don't want to pick something that's impossible, and we don't want to pick something too easy. We want to pick something in the middle, which is to do something that's difficult and challenging, but is something you know you can do. So for example, if I'm learning a new language, I don't want to set the goal for mastery that by day 2, I'm going to be fluent in Spanish.
Why not?
It's possible. I mean, I would love if I could learn that quickly, but I don't feel like that is a reasonable expectation, right? But maybe like by day 2, I can like say the alphabet or something where it's a challenge. I'm gonna have to work at it, but it's something I can achieve. One thing we notice when we're doing mastery is that when we are doing these accomplishments and achieving, it gives us feelings of control. It gives us feelings of accomplishment. It makes us feel good about ourselves. And it can help increase your feelings of like self-esteem, which is something that we all need at times. So mastery is important in that way. It helps us moving forward towards our goals, and it helps us feeling better about ourselves.
And something just from the perspective of like emotion regulation as a whole. And I saw someone put a question in the chat. Go ahead and put your questions in throughout, and Kris and I will do our best to answer them, and we'll spend a little bit of time at the end of the session leaving room for questions as well. But going back to this idea of emotion regulation as a skill set, think of those words, regulating emotion. So this is not something that's like limited to anybody who goes to therapy. This is something that every human in the world needs. We all need skills to help regulate emotion. And so the way I think of skills in DBT are like the skills that we're learning are meant to, what's the word? Fill in the deficits that we have. And everybody has deficits, right? So like if I get upset about something, I could go for a walk, and that's likely a skillful behavior that's has like less consequences and more pros. Or I could do something like punch a wall, which likely would have more negative consequences than pros, right? And so the idea is that with DBT, we want to fill in the deficits with skillful behaviors that are going to help us in the long run, not just in the short term. And so, you know, Kris talking about this idea of building mastery, think of the deficit here, right? Like the deficit is particularly if we're not feeling so hot about how things are going in our life and with ourselves, about our performance, about our image, like there are so many different things. And with all of the stressors that are going on in the world right now, there are a lot of things that will withdraw from our emotional bank, right? And so even if I can think of it in that way, like, wow, with all of these deficits, I need to be doing things that help me to feel confident and competent and good about myself. And I always think of this like emotion regulation as a simple bank transaction, right? There are going to be things that are making withdrawals out of my emotional bank. Again, like stress and, you know, just like things that come up in life that we don't expect to. Like my family is going through having deaths in the family right now. Like those things retract from my bank. And so I need to be intentional about putting things in the bank that are going to outweigh that. And so the practice of building mastery, increasing self-esteem, feelings of confidence and competence, that's doing something intentional to help balance it out. So it doesn't feel so tilted in the direction that leaves us feeling less competent, less confident, less accomplished, and, you know, fill in the rest of the story there.
Definitely. And that's where atomic habits also come in, right? So if you haven't read the book, or if you have, a lot of this is talking about building new habits, creating new lifestyle changes. And it's very much in line with this sense of mastery, where mastery is kind of like building over time. So again, similar to like learning Spanish, you can't just spend 3-4 days learning it and think that you're going to be fluent. And just like atomic habits, it talks about what's your end goal here. So maybe my end goal is to learn Spanish. And how are we going to get there? What are the steps? How do we trigger our brains to remember it? And atomic habits kind of holds hands with mastery here and talks about like, what are the things you're going to do each day or each week or each month that are difficult but possible to totally get to a place where this is becoming a habit for you and this becomes part of your lifestyle. And that holds hands with this mastery of doing things that challenge you, help you grow as a person, and getting that sense of accomplishment.
I generally tell this story. So imagine a line, and on the top of the line, you have something that's impossible. And below the line, you have something that's easy. If you don't pick the right task to build mastery, you're not going to feel a sense of accomplishment after, right? So like my mom would tell me that when I was 2 years old, or before I was 2 years old, I think it was before I was 2, that I could say my ABCs. And I was like, cool, that sounds really awesome for an almost 2-year-old. But now that I'm in my 30s, telling my ABCs, like, it just, I don't know, it doesn't have the same kind of excitement anymore. And people aren't generally as impressed. They don't clap for me when I tell my ABCs. Like, it's just not, it's too easy, right? And then Kris is giving us examples of overshooting. Like, I can think of a million times where I completely underestimated the task. And I said, okay, this is the thing that I'm going to do. And then as I start to try and do the thing, I realize that I wasn't prepared for it at all, right? Like trying to speak another language, or for me, a lot of the time, these mastery examples have to do with like going for runs. I'm going to sign up for this run. Don't know when I'm going to train, how I'm going to train, but I'm going to sign the run. Like, if anything, setting the goal is really the easy part. It takes 2 seconds to set a goal. Okay, yeah, I'm going to learn Spanish by next week. Cool. Atomic Habits, and James Clear is the person who wrote Atomic Habits. He says, don't focus on the goal, focus on the system. And this is exactly what mastery is about. And the cool thing about mastery is, because we're doing small things each day and we're working on building consistency instead of just focusing on what the finish line is, the I guess like margin for disappointment is way smaller. So instead of setting your goals really high and then being disappointed in yourself and then judging yourself, like this vicious cycle that starts to happen around, man, I didn't get it done. Like, I'm probably not going to feel more encouraged to then go up and do that thing I couldn't do the day before the next day. And then that starts to compound itself and make it like really hard to do anything. And the next thing you know, like 1 year or 10 years have gone by and you still haven't reached that goal. Not because you can't reach the goal, but maybe your systems are not set up in a way that can help you to do that. Anything else you want to add about mastery before we get a little bit into Atomic Habits?
No, I'll let you take it away.
So here's the thing, like Atomic Habits is a whole book and there's a lot of gold in there, and we're not going to be able to share it all with you, unfortunately, but we did just kind of like pick some of our favorite tips out of there to help those of you who are looking to start new habits. And I'm sure you've at least thought of it. Why? Because it's January 2022. And what do we all either do or at least refuse to do when the end of the year comes? We start reflecting on things. It's a very natural human behavior. And so whether you committed to some sort of resolution or not, you at some point have had the thought of like, okay, I can do better in this area. And how do I do better in this area? So we're hoping that you leave with tools, not only with building mastery, but maybe some tips from Atomic Habits to help support your mastery practice. So that way you can use this really like as a life skill. I think the other thing that was standing out in something from the book that I read was, this isn't something that, it's not like you check the box off and go. And I mean, Kris, I think you would agree with me. This is generally the case for emotion regulation skills. Well, when, I'm learning these now, when will I finish using them? Probably never, right? Like, it takes a lot of work to feel well emotionally. And so the idea of building consistent habits and practicing mastery, these are things to practice every day in your life forever in order to have a life that feels like it's worth living. So let me get into some of the stuff that some of the stuff that really stuck out to me. So again, we've been talking about why the link between Atomic Habits and building mastery. And I think for me, the big thing is about mastery being the system, right? So we know that it's really easy to focus on a goal. I want to run a marathon, or I want to learn a new language, or it might even be something that feels big to you, but smaller to other people. Like, I want to clean my house, or I got to clean my garage out, like something that just feels so overwhelming. And what we're trying to do is like, not necessarily just forget the goal completely, but kind of like stick a pin in it and think about it as a point on a map. If this is where I want to go, what are all of the things that I'm going to have to do in order to get there? What's my system going to be like? So considering like all of the behaviors that might have to happen that would lead me from point A to point B, just like you would on a map, right? Like, I can say I want to drive to California. That's not just a straight shot, right? Like, I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to get gas. I'm going to make sure I'm going to make sure I have enough to eat. I'm going to need places to sleep. I'm going to have to like formulate all of that, because if I try just to do a straight shot to California, it's likely that I'm going to hit a lot of like metaphorical and literal bumps along the way and then not get there. And that's what we're trying to avoid. When we think about what exactly does it mean to be building mastery, what are the steps involved? What's the prescription? And how does that align with Atomic Habits? The first thing is to do something each day that would give you a sense of accomplishment, right? That can be as small as checking something off of a box, right? So, and again, thinking of that scale of what's easy and impossible, mastery is going to change as things in your life change. So I mentioned that, saying my ABCs lately, it's not really giving me the same kind of thrill that it gave me when I was 1.5 years old. But some other things to consider, just like as the things change in your life, like for example, if you're feeling sick, if you have COVID, right? Your mastery levels are going to change from when you're on your A game and you're feeling really great, right? Getting up and getting out of bed and showering might be your mastery practice for the day when you're sick. And so it's also important to consider like the perspective and the context, so that way, you're moving along with that meter as it shifts and changes. Am I making sense, Kris? Does this sound right?
Definitely. And I think that's the important thing to highlight too, is that like sometimes we get committed to a mastery, and then when life gets difficult, we get disappointed in ourselves. We're like, but I'm not striving for this thing anymore. But like, if you're sick, if you're depressed, if you have a lot of things going on that demand your attention and your energy, mastery is going to shift to fix that. And so some days it is getting out of bed and getting that shower. Other days it's like, I'm going to go like walk 4 miles around my neighborhood because I'm feeling good. And I want to do some gentle exercise. So it's kind of figuring out like, and being aware of like in your wise mind, like, how does this fit in to this week or this day? And sometimes it's like going back to like the original action steps of like, I got up and got out of bed and put on new pants today. And that's a big win.
Yeah, I love that you brought in wise mind, which is another skill that we're not going to get into today, but it's this idea that, you're balancing emotion and logic, and you're coming to a place of not just what you feel like doing, but what needs to get done. And so I think that's super important, especially when we're thinking about mental health, right? Like, because on the one hand, it could be a very real, true experience. And it is a real, true experience that you might feel too depressed to get out of bed. And at the same time, if your emotions are always dictating your behavior, then you're going to have a life that's shaped by your emotions and your mood versus what actually needs to happen, right? There are going to be times where listening to your wise mind might be, hey, you need to stay in bed today. But there are also going to be times where wise mind is going to say, you need to get your butt up and get going, because you're never going to feel better if you keep staying here and getting in bed. So we're saying all of this just to hone in, build one thing a day to build accomplishment. This is what mastery is saying. However, you also have to be aware at the same hand of what looks like mastery for me today. And the second thing that we're looking at in the building mastery prescription is to plan for success and not failure. If you're already telling yourself that you're going to fail, that's making it like, again, we're thinking about climbing mountains here. And so if you're at the bottom of the mountain and you're just standing there talking about, God, oh my God, it's so high. It's so, I didn't bring the right shoes. Like, all of that is interfering with your ability to move forward. So see the finish line. Imagine what it would look like for you to be there, but also imagine what it would look like for you to get there. Somebody recently, this is a quote I've heard a million times, but I recently saw it and I thought, yep, good reminder. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Of course, thinking about the goal, really easy. Anyone can do it, but without thinking about the steps that are involved to get there, already we're kind of like shutting down our ability to move forward. The third thing is to gradually increase your mastery practice with in terms of intensity and difficulty. Again, saying my ABC is not cutting it anymore, but I recognize that there are other things that I can learn and do to build my practice of mastery, because at some point you will have then gained mastery over that thing that you were reaching for. And that's a really cool thing to reflect over as well, that will build more confidence, right? Like being able to look back and say, wow, I didn't even used to be able to take a walk around the block, and now I'm walking 4 miles, or I knew no words in Spanish and now I can at least hold a conversation or ask for the bathroom, right? So if I can like pay attention to the data that supports that I'm working towards my goal, in that moment, it's more likely to bring up a feeling of mastery and confidence, because in that moment, I'm someone who's speaking Spanish. I might only be able to ask to like where the bathroom is, but in that moment, I'm someone who's doing it. So paying attention to making sure that you're turning up the dial, because you are going to gain mastery over things. And then your level of mastery in that area or in other areas will just need to start to increase. The last part is staying mindful of making sure that you're looking for a challenge, which is really the same reason. We want to make sure that whatever it is that we're looking for in terms of a mastery practice is something that's not too easy, because if it is, it's just not going to have the same, it's not going to have the same effect, right? Like you're not going to feel much for it. Was there a question coming up, Kris?
Yeah. Can you repeat about failure to plan?
Yeah, failure to plan, what is the saying? Failing to plan is planning to fail. So let me think if I can share an example. So I'm trying to wake up earlier. I'm trying to wake up earlier because I can get way more done. I feel less stressed and overwhelmed throughout my day. I actually end up feeling more energized if I wake up earlier. And so what are the steps that were involved that needed to happen? So of course my mind just goes like, okay, I just need to set my alarm. Okay, cool. Set my alarm. Guess what happened? Didn't wake up earlier. Why? Well, I mean, in ways did I plan for it? Yes, but there were other things that had to happen too. I had to go to bed earlier the night before. Like it didn't matter that my alarm went off if I could just turn it off, right? I also had to do some other things to make the habit more attractive and easy. And I'll talk about some of those principles in a little bit. I had to set my clothes out the night before. I had to say no to watching extra TV. I had to read instead of watching TV before I went to bed because I would end up laying in bed and staying up later. There were all of these other things that were missing in my system that would lead me to the other side of getting up early and being successful. And so when I say failing to plan is planning to fail, like without focusing on the system or the habit that's going to get there, without focusing on the mastery that's going to get you to your end goal, then, you know, you're really not doing your goal or yourself justice because I mean, for me, I would wake up late and be like, oh my God, I slept through my alarm. Why do I do this? And like that whole thing starts to happen. And so it's really important to consider what the system is in order to get us there. What do you think, Kris? Any examples?
Yeah, I agree with you. One thing I'm working on, because I'm not very successful at this, is drinking more water. Like if I could live off of coffee, I would be a happy clam. But my doctor told me that's not healthy. So I'm drinking more water. And so like things like my initial thought was like, oh, I'll just do it. Like, all right, you have to, but that's not effective either with like the Nike mentality here. So things I've done is like, I got a water container that's really cute. It's like leopard print, which is my favorite. I always put it out on the counter the night before. I fill the water when I fill my cat's water bowls in the morning. And so I've tried to link it to these other things. And I also have an alarm on my phone. So I'll drink the first full one in the morning. And at 1 o'clock, my alarm goes off and says, get more water, girl. And so I'll go and I'll fill it up again. And because of these different reminders and these different like cues for me to realize, oh, wait, like water needs to happen. I'm now drinking 64 ounces a day, which if you know me, 8 was like a good day for me.
Okay. 8 ounces was a good day.
Yeah. I live
that is
off
a huge improvement.
If I could live off of coffee and diet soda, I'd be happy.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm sure, just side note, your anxiety level is probably lower with less caffeine and more, we probably feel like a little more balanced, a little less on edge. Yeah. Other people can relate to the coffee thing. Okay. So the second reason, or the second way in which atomic habits is a really nice way to support building mastery. So in DBT, we talk about building a life worth living. And I found myself yesterday writing my notes, just kind of on accident, building a life worth loving. Oh, like let that sink in. Building a life worth loving, building and creating a life that you actually want to live in and participate in. And so the cool thing I like about DBT, well, there's a million of them, but like one of them is this idea of dialectics and how there can be opposing truths, right? That still have value. And so, you know, the reality is that like life can be really hard. Life can even if it's not hard, it's like sometimes it can just be really boring. And it can be really difficult to get motivated to go on and get up and get moving and go on for the next step. And so I think the idea of, you know, your life is going to sometimes feel like it's not worth living, or sometimes it's going to feel like it's not worth loving. And if that's the case, then that's all right. Like you need to do things that are going to help you build that life so you have it. So instead of just staying there and being like down in the hole of this sucks, finding ways to get yourself up and out of it. And this is why, again, one of many reasons why emotion regulation is so important. But particularly, you know, with atomic habits, one of the like parts that really grabs me in the book where he talks about this idea of making 1% improvements. So if you could make just a 1% improvement from yesterday to today, over time, that's really going to it's going to lead to compound interest. It's going to make huge changes in your life. He did the math. I'm not a math person. I don't care to build mastery in math. Like I'm okay with where I'm at right now. this person did the math and he says 1% better for each day equals 37 times better by this time next year. Think of that. Just doing 1% better each day will have you in a place at which you're 37 times better next year, or you can get 1% worse each day. So that would probably be not making any improvements on whatever area of your life that you're paying attention to, or doing things that actually make them worse. And you're going to be at the 0 line, or maybe even feeling a little sub-zero by this time next year. So when you think about that, it's like, wow, in the short term, it feels like 1% change from yesterday to today. So like when Kris is working on her water intake, when she went from day 1 to day 2, let's say day 2 is I'm going to order the water bottle. Okay, that's it. In the grand scheme of things, if she just bought the water bottle, that's not going to change her life. But she kept making improvements and now she's up to 64 ounces, right? So like probably within a couple of months, she'll be at a place where this is now an automated system in her brain. She's not going to have to work so hard to get water in because it's just going to be something that like she does automatically. And that's another thing to consider is like, I know that there can be a lot of just like, oh my God, like drinking more water or becoming more healthy or moving more. Like there are so many things and it can just feel so overwhelming. But again, that's because we're focused on all of the systems in between, not just what's one thing I can do tomorrow that's better than today. He also talks about this example of if you were flying from LA to New York and the airplane were to shift or make an adjustment of just 3.5 degrees south, you would instead land in Washington, D.C. instead of New York. So again, in the moment, those little shifts, and even thinking of the airplane kind of like slowly moving its trajectory, eventually it lands in a completely different area. So think of yourself today and what it is that you want to be working on and how you can make the tiniest change to shift from where you are today to where you are tomorrow, and then continue to do that and continue to do that. This is the same idea behind building mastery. Kris, anything to add here?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too, is that again, like Shaelene was saying, sometimes we have these big goals of like, I need to drink 64 ounces of water a day. And it's like, I don't even like water. But like, how can you break it down in these small little bite-sized things that like, again, challenge you a little bit, and then they can build on each other. It's like stacking Legos where again, you have one brick and then you have a whole tower. So instead of like getting so fixated on like the end goal, like what's the little step you're doing? Make it bite-sized, but challenging. And then it feels a lot less overwhelming.
Yeah. And the idea of compound interest, like what we do will continue to like stack up and multiply on itself. These can go, our habits can impact, our habits can be compounded, blah, 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 in a way that's either positive or negative, right? So consider the idea of compounding knowledge, right? So knowledge is a value. It's not necessarily something that I have a check mark on. So goals are things that we can kind of like check off and say like, okay, yes, I've done this and completed it. Whereas values are more like pillars that shape the goals that we're working towards, right? Values are like permanent positives that we're always working on. And generally there will be times where, you know, again, our values might shift and change, but the goal is to make sure that our actions are in line with our values in order to build a life worth living. And so if my value is knowledge and learning, right? I can commit to reading one page of a book every day. And again, that one page of knowledge is not going to make a difference, but all of that is going to compound itself if I do that habit every day. There was an example in the book that I really loved about an ice cube. So like if you take an ice cube and you're trying to melt it, and let's say you have it on a stove in a pan or something, and you're changing it degree at a time, it doesn't melt at 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, you know, it goes up until this point, and then all of a sudden it starts melting. And what is the melting point of that? So yes, on the one hand, it might have melted once it hit, I don't know, 40 degrees, but it didn't just melt at 40 degrees. It also melted because of all of the warming that happened on the way up. And so this is another way to think of compound interest. Another value that someone might have is to have a more peaceful life. And how can I compound that? Well, every day in the morning when I get up, I can take 3 deep breaths. Cat's making an appearance. I can take 3 deep. He just has to know. He has to know these skills as well, right? Like cat mastery. So I can take 3 deep breaths every morning when I wake up, or I can decide that as soon as my alarm goes off, I sit up and I stretch. small things that over time are going to compound. Now let's look at the opposite of that in terms of negative compounding, right? Negative self-talk, judgments and criticism towards yourself generally begets more judgments and criticism. Why? Because it kind of compounds itself. It's hard to see things in a positive light if you're constantly judging yourself, your environment, and everyone around you. Also, stress compounds. So it may not feel like a huge deal that you're stuck in traffic from work, but you're stuck in traffic from work on your way to go pick up your kid from daycare, you're running late, and it's all during a pandemic. So like one thing and another thing and another thing, they all start to add up. And after time, we want to make sure that we're not letting the negatives outweigh the positives, and that we're starting to make intentional movement to kind of shift that balance, which again brings us back to building mastery. The last thing I'll talk about here and kind of like bringing these together, I can't say this enough, building a life worth living and loving. We want to make sure that values are in line with our actions are in line with our values. And I love this other part in the book where James Clear talks about behavior change and how true behavior change is identity change. I'll say that one more time. True behavior change is identity change. We have to let go of the identity that's limiting for us. So instead of, I want to be someone who learns more, that would be more effective to take on as an identity. Like, I'm someone who loves learning, as opposed to I'm someone who's stupid and doesn't know anything. Like, that kind of just puts up a brick wall and there's not much that you can do there. But when we can recognize, like, okay, here where my judgments are showing up, they're limiting. So let me start with removing that and stepping into who is the kind of person that I want to be and what kind of things would that person do. So if I think of, I want to be someone who learns a lot, then I might want to increase my practice of reading, or I might want to be someone who attends more classes instead of like full stop, I am someone who learns. Like, okay, but like, what are the things that you're doing to support that? Instead of learning a skill, like everyone who knows about DBT, I want to learn skills. I want to be a skillful person. So what would a skillful person do? Well, they show up to webinars like these. Maybe they read books, they listen to podcasts, maybe they sign up and go to a DBT group. Maybe they look at their diary card and commit to practicing one skill a day. So there are a couple of different ways that we can do this, but I think the idea to start with is to consider what your values are and to consider how that plays into your identity. And when you think, I want to be a healthy person, to start asking yourself those questions. What would a healthy person do? And this will help us let go of the finish line of what's my goal and start focusing on the systems that'll help get us there. Anything to add, Kris?
No, I think that's the important part. It's like creating your roadmap essentially of, like, just like Shaelene was saying earlier, if I want to go to California, but I don't plot like what's the route and what do I need to do and do I have enough food, or we're going to fail. And so like making sure that like we let go of like, this is how it has to be, and be flexible too in creating that plan, because sometimes the best laid plans can fail, and that's okay. It doesn't mean to give up on the goal, but also knowing like there might be some pivoting that happens here.
For sure. Lots of pivoting. I think also when we can't get that part straight, like values are, even though our values may change, they're not an endpoint, they're habits and they go on forever. If we can't get behind that we're going to have to practice, we're going to have to be intentional with things forever to have a life that feels worth living and loving, it's going to lead to misery. It's going to lead to burnout. So I just want to like preface that there needs to be this deep acceptance of, yes, like it does take hard work to feel well emotionally. It does take hard work to have a life that feels like one that you want to live and to become the person that you want to become. But I think the trade-off is like much better, right? Because it's also hard work to be someone who's miserable and burnt out all of the time. And that doesn't feel good as well. I'll wrap up my section here before Kris talks about a couple of more tips to practice atomic habits. One of the things that stuck out to me, another quote, he says, every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. Every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. So there's this two-step process to changing your identity. And this is what we've been talking about, having your actions line up with your values to be more of fill in the blank, whatever kind of person you want to be. Decide the person that you want to be, look at what your values are, and then prove it to yourself with small wins every day. Okay, I see questions coming up, which are great. I'm going to come back to them. Go ahead, Kris. Kris is going to give us like another trick for atomic habits.
All right. So one thing he talks about in Atomic Habits is the 4 steps in building a habit. So the 4 steps, and then I'll go into a little bit more information on what they are, is the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. So the cue is, this is the element that allows your brain to recognize the opportunity for reward. So the 2 most common cues are time and location. So again, like if you think about my drinking water at night, I would put my like water bottle on the counter. And so that way the next morning when I would go to fill up my cat bowls, when I feed them, it's right there. It's in front of me. I see it. It reminds me that like, oh, wait, like you need to drink more water. Like here's step 1. You need to drink this. You need to fill it up. And that was kind of like my cue where it gave my brain the opportunity to recognize, here's an opportunity to take that step that you said. Is right here. You can't ignore it. With the cue, it's kind of like when this situation arises, I'll perform this response. So same thing with my alarm at 1 o'clock. So the cue comes on where my alarm goes off and says, drink more water, girl. I'm like, all right, got it. It goes off at 1. And then I need to perform the response of going downstairs and filling up my water bottle. And that way I get the second amount of water for the day. So the big thing to know is once this implementation of intention has been set, you don't need to wait for inspiration to strike. So the nice thing too is it's a predetermined plan. So when you're making these action steps that Shaelene's been talking about, we have made a plan. So it takes the guesswork out of it. I don't want to wake up in the morning and be like, don't forget to drink water today, Kris, because then I'm probably not going to do it because I don't have a plan in place or I haven't decided how I'm going to do that. It also helps you be more accountable or know what you're going to do because you've set these action steps or you've made the plan of this is what I have to do to get towards my goal. And that's all falling under this cue piece. So that's the first step.
You said something really important. You said you don't need inspiration, right? This is a quote from Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And he says, if you want motivation, take action. This is like a huge thing when it comes to building habits and building mastery. We can't rely on motivation to get us through to whatever the next step is because motivation is fleeting like other emotions, right? So again, we're seeing this highlighted pattern of letting go of emotions making our decisions, letting go of waiting till the time where it feels good, and just trying to instead focus on systems that make it super easy to have consistency. So that way, then we do the task and then we get that like burst of feeling proud or whatever that dopamine spike is. That'll be the thing that motivates us moving forward. But we can't really wait for it to get started because, oh my God, like that might never come.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the next step is this craving, which is the emotional relevance to your cue. So example, again, I see that water bottle in the morning and I'm like, I don't even like water, but I know that relevance of like, of, my doctor has told me it's important. Humans need water in their systems to feel good and healthy. And so like, there's a little bit of anxiety. Like if I don't do this, like I'm not taking the best care of myself or I'm creating vulnerabilities for myself emotionally. And so there's a little bit of anxiety there. And also too, I think of the nights when I have drank my 64 ounces of water, like there's a sense of pride. I did something that for me feels pretty challenging, or for me that like feels like I have to work on it. And so like, I also remember that in the back of my mind of like, even though it might not feel great to get started on this goal, it does feel really good when I meet my goal. And that's kind of the craving is like, what is the emotional response to you doing this? Or what is that cue reminding you of in that moment?
Yeah. And that'll be the thing that gets you coming back. Like that's where the motivation starts to come in. And I think a lot of us worry or take the path of, well, I'm just not really feeling up to it today. It's like, no, duh, you're not feeling up to it today. You would have done it already if you were feeling up to it. So remembering like the motivation is going to be a delayed reward that comes later. These are principles of reinforcement, right? Like we're not likely to do behaviors if we can't get something out of it. That's just a human thing, right? Like no shame there. But if there's not something that's naturally happening, then we have to put intention into making it happen, making it be more reinforcing. And so in this situation, Kris is talking about, okay, well, I know I feel better at the end of the day when I do it. I know all of these reasons that I'm supposed to do it for my health and what my doctor will say and all of this other stuff. And so she's taking time to create the reinforcement that it wasn't coming prior to drinking the water.
Exactly. So after you have the cue, which is the time or place or situation that reminds you to do something, the craving, which is the emotion that hopefully gives you a little extra bump of motivation when your motivation may be lacking. The third part is the response, which is doing the behavior. So that is taking that action. And again, that action step is going to look different on different days. If I'm sick, I might be drinking more water because you're supposed to get a lot more fluids when you're not feeling well. Or there are days where I'm busy, and if I get 32 ounces that day, just because I'm running around like a chicken with no head, I still drink some water, and that's going to be what's good enough for that day. But the response is going to be whatever that behavior or habit is that you're working on. So that is doing the thing. And then the fourth thing is the reward, which is like that satisfaction or accomplishment. So again, linking back to that mastery, we're doing things that challenge you because we want to create a sense of accomplishment. We want to create that satisfaction. We want to create that like self-esteem bump. And that's what this reward is. It's getting those feelings of like, I did it, I accomplished it, I met my goal, I was accountable to myself. And that too is also going to help increase that motivation to keep doing it, because it feels good when we do what we want to do and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a water bottle I got from my mom for Christmas, and it like lights up at the bottom when you drink it all. Like, so that's the reinforcement, right? Like you drink the water, it doesn't dance, but it gets it lights up and everything. That's reinforcing drinking water. Okay, so again, I just want to kind of like recap here. We're throwing a lot of information at you guys, and 1 degree better than yesterday. The goal isn't for you to take all of this information and then feel overwhelmed. That might happen, and that's okay. Instead, we're hoping that, again, like we're trying to dispel this whole book. And again, the DBT book is even bigger than that. So we're just trying to give you a little something that you can work with. And maybe you decide to come back into this book or back into the DBT book. But at least you have an idea of one thing out of here that you can take and start to put into practice today or tomorrow. So I say that because we're kind of like picking different areas of the book that we wanted to focus on. And if you were to read it, you might feel like, wait a minute, this was here. These are just things that stuck out to us. So before we move into questions and answers and resources and things like that, I'll just finish with the 4, I believe he calls them the 4 laws of building any habit. The first one is to make it obvious, to make it like super easy in your face, right? So if I'm trying to wake up in the morning, I'm going to make sure that my alarm clock is right next to me. I also am going to make sure that my clothes are out for the next day. I'm going to make it as easy as possible. Easy is step 3. But step 2 is make it attractive. So first is making it obvious, right in your face. Second is making it attractive. And so the idea with making it attractive is trying to pair it with something that you want to do, whatever the behavior is. So like for me, getting up in the morning gives me extra time to be able to go on a walk. And I love going on walks because it's time for me to get away and be by myself. And I can listen to a podcast or a book. It's like one of my favorite things to do. So I'm going to pair the thing that I want to do, which is going for a walk, with the thing that I need to do in order to do that, which is getting up early. I can't go on the walk if I don't get up early. That's what I was finding. And so that's why I decided to make this change. So make it attractive. Another thing that you might do is like delay some sort of reward that you're going to give to yourself. So one thing that Kris could do, if you want, is you could start delaying your morning coffee until you've had at least 1 glass of water. So get the thing that I want after I've done the thing that I need. She doesn't have to drink all 64 of her ounces in the morning, but by starting with at least 1 glass, she's put herself in a situation where she's more likely to do it because she's working towards the thing that she wants. The third, as I mentioned, is making it easy. So we're talking 2-minute tasks, nothing more than that. 1 degree better than yesterday isn't drinking 64 ounces of water starting by day 2, or signing yourself for, living in a foreign country where you only speak that language on day 2, or waking up at 5 a.m. 5 days out of the week, right? Just 1 degree more, because if we focus on smaller changes, the outcome is going to be different. Whereas opposed to if we focus on changes that are too big, we're more likely to fall down and then feel frustrated and then have to convince ourselves to get back up on the wagon or on the horse. There's also another resource, tinyhabits.com. I believe there's a book on tiny habits. It's the same kind of principle. Like you have to make the habit or thing that you're going to do each day so incredibly small that there's no way that you wouldn't be able to do it, and then start moving on from there. There was an example in the book of this guy who needed to lose a bunch of weight for health reasons. And his first practice was just driving to the gym. So just driving to the gym every day was the first practice. And when that felt so easy, it was just go in the gym for 5 minutes. So like he would stop himself in his workouts and leave. And some people might think like, well, you know, what's the point? You're already there. Because the habit of being able to go to the gym consistently can't happen without showing up, can't happen without walking in the door. And we really have to consider how many steps are involved before we reach whatever our goal or our endpoint is. The last law of making a habit would be to make it something that's satisfying. And Kris was telling us about this, trying to find ways to make it reinforcing or rewarding. So that way we're more likely to do it. You know, you can also consider trying to build habits with the inverse of these laws by, instead of making it obvious, make the behavior that you're trying to decrease something that's invisible, right? So maybe I want to stop scrolling on my phone. Whew, that's a big one, right? So making it invisible might mean that as soon as I get home from work, I put it in a drawer and leave it for the day. If I need it, I can go get it, but it's not in my face all of the time. So I'm less likely to grab it. It's not as easy. Also, watching TV. Maybe I unplug the TV at night when I'm done watching it. So there's one more step that's involved the next day when I come home to watch it. The second would be making it unattractive, right? So making it something that's undesirable. Again, making it so difficult that you would be able to do the behavior that you're indulging in that you want to decrease, that you no longer want to do it anymore because it just involves too much work. Make it difficult and make it unsatisfying. So you're just taking the principles of building healthy habits or the habits that you're looking for, and you're doing the inverse of them to decrease habits that you are trying to bring down. And building mastery is relevant with that as well. Like, you know, sometimes we're building mastery at tolerating distress or taking a habit or some kind of value that has actions that are backing it up in a way that's causing more problems for us. Like, then I might need to consider, what are my ways of decreasing that practice in terms of building mastery? I think as well, like, you know, sometimes I've had people ask in therapy, if I'm here in therapy and I don't like my life as it is, like, then what does that mean about my values? You're still prioritizing values, but maybe it's an issue in prioritizing and it's an issue in systems that are not leading towards the life that you want to live, right? So and values is a whole separate skill. It's a whole nother lesson. So I don't want to get too much into that, but I think, like, you know, not getting up early to get up and walk, my value is being comfortable, right? Like, my value is being cozy and warm. And at that moment, when the alarm goes off, I can go out and get dressed and go into the cold, or I can stay in my warm, cozy bed. So like, the values are still there, but the behaviors that back them up are there as well. And so, like, the good news is that even if you feel like you don't have a quote unquote like good system or an effective system or an effective practice of mastery, and it doesn't feel like your values and actions are aligning, like, something got you to where you are now. And so there's no reason that you can't undo it. It won't be easy, but you can still change it, because there are certain systems and actions that got you to where you are now, even if you want to change what that is.
Yeah, just like echoing Shaelene, like, one of the principles in DBT is change is the only constant. And so if you're sitting there listening to this and being like, oh, wait, like, I feel so stuck in my habits. Sure, you probably feel stuck because we've been doing them for so many years, and think of like how routine they've become. But if you start practicing something different, even if it's 1% at a time, you can start to rewrite those habits in other ways. And then those will be the things that you're like, I feel like I can't break this new habit because I've been just mastering it over and over again. It takes a lot of practice, but you can get to it where like this habit becomes your automatic behavior. It just that 1% over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm loving all of the stuff in the chat. There's some good stuff in here. Okay, so I want to read this one question that came up in the Q&A. What do you recommend when it comes to using opposite action? So opposite actions, another emotion regulation skill. Shout out to DBT. When you're trying to use opposite action to attempt to build a habit that involves another person and the other person isn't receptive. So for example, this person wants to have a better relationship with their neighbor, but the neighbor isn't really receptive to that. So this person tries to do opposite action by doing things like saying hello, bringing in our trash and the newspaper. So what kind of habits would you build with trying to improve relationships when it feels like someone else isn't receptive? What do you think, Kris?
I think this is hard because we can only control so much when it comes to other people. Like,
For sure,
this person may just not be very friendly, or they might not be willing. And so maybe like the habit is like just being proud of your practice of being a person who's generous to other people. Maybe that's the value that's coming up here. And so like your opposite action is doing these things and mastering that, and yet like maybe getting unattached, like the outcome of the reciprocation of that behavior. And like
True.
mastering like even that, just radical acceptance of like, this is the reality you may be in, despite being as skillful as you are.
Yeah, that is so real. I mean, on the one hand, what are behaviors that might improve relationships with your neighbors? I think those are all behaviors that, you know, bringing trash in, saying hello, how are you doing? Like all of those things may be the habits that would build relationships. However, if that person's not receptive to it, then like, you know, what are you going to do? That doesn't mean that you phone in the relationship altogether. Maybe it's just that neighbor. So are there things that you could do for other neighbors in your area? Like, the same thing, walking by, hey, how you doing? I'll give like what I feel like is a similar example. I know myself as a DBT therapist, you know, the two opposing paradigms are acceptance and change, and they're equally important. And so on the one hand, we want to, as therapists, help clients to do this for themselves, but also do it in our therapy, accept that clients and people, everyone is doing the best they can, and that they also need to do better, try harder, and work harder to change, right? And so I know that my style falls on the side of change more often. I have to work harder to be on the side of acceptance. And so for my team, something that I want to do is I want to work on being a more accepting leader. And so I have a post-it note. I'm kind of like letting my secrets out. Kris is here, but I have a little post-it note on my computer that says compliment daily. Like I want to be a more supportive leader, right? So I want to make sure that at least once a day I'm giving a compliment to someone on my team. That's my habit to do that. So I'm thinking there might be ways where you can kind of take the things that you're doing already to this person who asked this and put that into play with other neighbors in your area that might still be relevant. So just because it's not working with this one person, you know, it might not be that you're not, it may not be that it's an issue with your system. It may just be that like, this is as far as the relationship's going to go, and that's okay, but you can still use those skills elsewhere.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's see what else is in the chat. Sounds like radical acceptance. Yeah. So on the one hand, in order to change, we can't truly change without accepting the reality that we're in, or else like we're always going to be shooting for a star that's not really there. So that's very important as well. Somebody else mentioned getting yoga clothes on my body was a start to getting back into yoga. Sometimes I just walk around in my yoga clothes. Eventually I got to the studio. Exactly. Like these are the small steps that we're talking about. Okay. So I want to share a couple resources before we end for today. There's a couple of quotes that stick out to me that just like have been playing on repeat. So I wanted to share them with you. This isn't necessarily from the book. It actually might have been from like a workout class that I took. I can't remember, but the idea is time over attention, consistency above intensity. Time over attention is basically showing up more consistently every day, as opposed to showing up inconsistently and then putting your all into that, but then being totally out of gas in the days to come. Consistency over intensity is the same kind of idea. Instead of going big or go home, go little every day and make small steps in order to get to where you're going. Another quote, this one is from the Atomic Habits book. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so in order to build the life that you're looking for and to get to whatever that endpoint is, and to make sure that your actions are in line with your values, you have to take a look at what are the systems that I'm using and how are they going to help me get there. So those are some of my favorite quotes that came out from the book. And then some of you might be wondering like, okay, this was cool. What's next? Where do I go next? I mean, obviously we are talking a ton about the Atomic Habits book. You can purchase that book. You might be hearing about DBT for the first time and want to learn more about DBT skills. We offer DBT skills at DBT of South Jersey. So definitely hit us up on our website. You can follow us on Instagram at DBT of South Jersey. If you're looking for a skills group, you don't necessarily have to be doing therapy with us. So you can still like learn from the skills anyway. So that's definitely a resource. Also wanted to share that on our website, I wonder if I can share this with you. We did create a habit tracker if you would like to use it. So if you go to our website and then go to, I think it was under the resource page. Yeah. So go to dbtsouthjersey.com. go to resources, and then down here at the bottom, you'll see webinar handout and worksheets, the habit tracker. So this might be something that you print out for yourself to start working on tracking your habits. So there's a monthly version and a weekly version. Take the habit that you're working on, color the boxes in a different color, or just check them off every day. And then you can print one out for each month, or do it based on the week. You don't necessarily have to use this to be tracking habits, but it might just be one other way to visually reinforce yourself for what you're doing. And, as we talked about, that's something that helps those behaviors go a little further. There is also, if you go on Spotify and you look up Brene Brown's podcast, I want to say, can't remember which one it is, but if you go on Brene Brown, her podcast, and look up the conversation with her and James Clear, it's a 2-part episode. It's only on Spotify. That's another great conversation about building habits. So that was another free resource that's out there if you care to listen to it. And then we also have more skills sessions coming up. So not really related to building mastery atomic habits, but if you go on our website, go under events, you'll see our DBT skill session section, and you can go on there and sign up for the next skill session. I think the next one that's coming up is in February, and it's run by Lisa, and it's on loving kindness, using loving kindness, which is a DBT skill to heal from trauma. So go ahead and find that on the website. I'm also going to stick that link in the chat if you want to go ahead and sign up for it now. And then if there are any other questions that people have, we're happy to answer them.
Oh, and don't forget our blog. We have a blog on our website as well, where all of us therapists who work here talk about our own practice of the different skills, and you can see them in the titles of which skill is talked about each month. So check out our blog as well. We get real vulnerable. We're human too. It's awesome.
Yeah, our blog is about sharing our own skills practice. And I know there are ones that are on there about building mastery. So go ahead and check that out. Somebody asked about how they would have access to the recording. I'm not sure if it's going to be today or tomorrow, but an email will go out. So everyone who signed up, if someone had trouble like logging in, you'll be able to see it through the link. So it's like a lot of people can relate to the coffee addiction and the struggle to be with increasing your water intake. Yeah, for sure. I'm
in good company.
Yeah. Again, like we have so much more to say and to share, but it's such a short amount of time. So we appreciate everyone coming out and really just like spreading the word around DBT. Again, like if everyone was practicing DBT skills, then the world would be a better place. And here we are all being a part of that message and mission. So feel free to share this with people. Somebody asked, where do I find the blog? So if you go on the DBT of South Jersey website, I believe the header says blog, and then you'll see it's called the Level 6 Radically Genuine blog. And there's a bunch of them on there. They're all written by therapists. Yeah. Who is on Spotify? It's the Brene Brown podcast, and it's her episode with James Clear, but you can only find it on Spotify. She doesn't do them on Apple Music. Yeah. Let me see if I'm missing. Let's see if I can find the exact one, because she has 2 different shows. Dare to Lead podcast. Brene Brown with James Clear on Atomic Habits. It's a 2-part episode. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we are just about done. So again, thank you all for coming and hanging with us. Good luck with your mastery practice. Good luck with building atomic habits. If you would like to share about them, tag us on Instagram so we can see what you're doing and what's going on. And yeah, let's make it a great 2022. But instead of focusing on 2022, let's just worry about today, right? Okay, everyone, take good care.